the last regret. Every morning, Thomas walked through the same park. The crisp morning air, the smell of wet earth and fresh grass hitting his nose. It felt like the last connection to something pure in his life. He came here to be invisible, to watch. No one really noticed him, and that was how he preferred it. The park was filled with life, mothers with children, joggers with earbuds, and old men playing chess. But Thomas was no longer part of that life. He used to be someone. At least that's what he told himself. He was a man full of ambition and potential. But somewhere along the way, he'd let himself slip. His marriage had unraveled, his career had stalled, and his dreams, once vibrant, had faded into something barely recognizable. Now, he was just here, watching. Today, like every other day, he sat on his bench, nursing his coffee, eyes scanning the park, drifting between faces. A figure caught his attention across the way, sitting on the bench directly across from him. A man in a tailored suit, moving with the kind of self-assurance that made others step aside instinctively. Tall, confident, with a presence that demanded respect. The man exuded something Thomas hadn't felt in years. A subtle charisma, a warmth, a quiet certainty that filled the space around him. He was alive in a way Thomas couldn't remember ever being. But then, something made Thomas pause. There was something about the man that seemed familiar. He leaned forward, narrowing his eyes. The man was watching him, not just glancing but staring. There was something about the way he looked, intense, deliberate. Thomas shifted uneasily, unsure why it felt so unsettling. As if drawn by some invisible force, his eyes lingered longer than usual. He couldn't tear himself away from that gaze. And then it hit him. The man across from him was him. No, it couldn't be. But as Thomas looked closer, the truth was undeniable. The man sitting across the park, looking so poised, so perfect, was a version of Thomas. Not the Thomas who sat on the bench every day, watching life pass by. No, this man was everything Thomas had ever wanted to be, but never had the courage to become. The version of him that had succeeded. The version of him that still believed. It was the version of him that never gave up. The man stood from his bench and slowly, deliberately, began walking toward Thomas. Every step seemed measured, as if the world itself bent to the man's will. As he approached, the intensity of the moment made Thomas's heart race. There was a sharpness to his movements, a grace in the way he carried himself that made Thomas feel smaller, like a child caught in a moment of weakness. "Do you see it now?" the man said softly, as though he'd known Thomas would finally notice. Thomas could barely speak. His mouth was dry. What are you?" The man smiled, a knowing smile. "I'm you, Thomas. The version of you that you never let yourself become." Thomas's breath caught in his throat. His stomach churned. "No. This isn't real. You're not me." The man smiled. "I am. I'm what you could have been, if you'd fought, if you'd chosen to fight. I'm the you who decided to live." Thomas's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't want to hear this. He didn't want to admit it. But somewhere, deep down, he knew it was true. He'd let his dream slip away. He'd stopped fighting for anything. He stopped living. The man took another step closer, his eyes never leaving Thomas's. There was no escaping him now. "You know, don't you, that I'm everything you could have been? The man who seized every opportunity, the man who was never afraid to fail." Thomas looked away, unable to bear the weight of the man's gaze. His hands trembled on his knees. He could feel the ache in his chest, the gnawing emptiness that had only grown stronger with time. He'd been too afraid, too uncomfortable with the idea of failure to even try anymore. "You will never be me," the man continued, his voice now colder, sharper. "You'll always be the man who watches, who stands on the sidelines, too paralyzed by fear to live. And that's what will kill you, Thomas." The words hit him like a punch, a sharp, brutal truth. Fear. That was what had kept him from reaching for anything. It was the reason he never took chances, never fought for his dreams. It was the reason his marriage had died, why his career had stalled, and why he sat on this bench every single day, watching life unfold for everyone but himself. The man took a final step forward, standing directly in front of him. "You think you'll ever catch up to me? You'll never be me." Thomas couldn't breathe. He wanted to scream, to deny it all, but the words lodged themselves in his throat. He wanted to fight back, to make some kind of argument, but there was nothing left to say. He knew it now. He would never become the person he'd always dreamed of being. Not now. Not ever. The man turned and began to walk away, each step pulling him further from Thomas, leaving behind nothing but the suffocating weight of those words. "You'll never be me," the man said again, his voice drifting back to Thomas as he disappeared into the crowd. "And that's what will haunt you forever." Thomas sat there, alone, his hands shaking at his sides. The world moved around him. People continued to live their lives, to walk past, to chase their dreams, to love, to fail, to try again. They didn't notice him. He was just another face on a bench, another man watching life slip through his fingers. He wanted to stand, to chase after that man, to demand answers, to prove he was something. But the truth was, he had no strength left. The version of himself he had seen in the park was nothing but a ghost, a dream that would never come true. The air felt heavy. Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that he had been marked, condemned to live in the shadow of someone he could never be. Time was slipping away, and he had wasted it all. He wasn't sure how long he sat there, lost in thought, but when he finally stood, his legs felt weak, unsteady, as if even his own body had given up on him. And as the park buzzed with life, Thomas knew, deep down, he would never become that man. Not now. Not ever. The park was filled with people, but he was alone. The last thing he ever saw before the world faded to black was that perfect version of himself. Walking, always walking, further and further away.